everyone, you're very welcome back to the show. Thank you for joining us on Winning Formula. It's about a week since the Italian Grand Prix, and just thinking back now on how that race went, it was quite an exciting race. Obviously, there are the Hamilton-Verstappen incidents that we need to discuss, but as well, Daniel Ricciardo and McLaren winning again. How great was that? So good to see them there winning. So great to see Ricciardo smiling on the top of the podium. It's been a while. We've come close, of course. We've come close over the last couple of years, but not since he was in the Red Bull. So looking at the race starting grid, we had Max Verstappen was on pole position. This, of course, was as a follow-on from the sprint race on the Saturday. Max Verstappen started in pole position. Hamilton couldn't make up any ground at all. He was really struggled during the sprint race, and as a result, Ricciardo was starting in second and Norris in third. Hamilton now starting in fourth place. He could not get past Norris during the race. He really struggled, which was it was very interesting because, of course, as we saw later on in the full feature-length race, Valtteri Bottas seemed to be well able to overtake people. Now, Bottas did actually win the sprint race, but because of an engine penalty, he ended up starting the race in last place. Then it was Leclerc in fifth, Sainz in sixth, Giovinazzi, what a fantastic qualifying for him, seventh place, Perez was in eighth, Stroll was in ninth, and Alonso was in 10th place. So that was the top 10 starting off. Where's Sebastian Vettel? I hear you asking. Well, he started in 11th place for the race. So that's where he was. The race started anyhow, and it was a fantastic start from Ricciardo. He really got the jump on Hamilton and Verstappen. So it was Ricciardo off into first place. Quite a comfortable gap it seemed like he had. And then directly behind we had Hamilton and Verstappen battling it out, and they had Norris to keep them company. So Norris was certainly causing a little bit of danger for those two guys, and it kept them on the race, not thinking about Ricciardo so much, but rather thinking about each other, and of course about Norris, who was trying to pick up the pieces if anything happened between them. And of course, something did happen between them. So there was the first coming together between Hamilton and Verstappen. Hamilton was trying very hard to get past, but he just didn't have the room for Verstappen, and he got pushed over the chicane, and he took the bumpy shortcut over the chicane, whereas by comparison, a little later on in the race, there was a very different outcome when they came together again. That pushed Hamilton down into fourth place, so he was behind Norris at this point. I told you Norris was there to pick up the pieces, and it meant that Verstappen was battling with Daniel Ricciardo, and it was an interesting battle between both of those pairs for a little while until we got to the first round of pit stops. So Verstappen and Ricciardo. Verstappen really wasn't making too much ground on Ricciardo. Ricciardo, of course, driving in the McLaren, which has the Mercedes engine, which would be a preferred circuit. So this Monza circuit is definitely a preferred circuit for these really power-hungry Mercedes engines, and that's why this was anticipated that Mercedes were going to walk away with this weekend. And of course, it didn't work out that way with Bottas's engine penalty, and then what happened a little bit later between Hamilton and Verstappen. So we'll come to that. Norris and Hamilton was also an interesting battle. Hamilton did try very hard to get past Norris, but it just wasn't working out for him. Every time he got in that dirty air, it just really messed up his flow, and he wasn't able to get the move done. Unfortunately for him, I know he got very frustrated about this, and later on, thankfully the pit stop sorted that out for Hamilton. He was able to get a little bit of clean air when Norris pitted. But by comparison, as I mentioned, Bottas, who started at the back of the field, was making up ground very, very fast, and he had no problem whatsoever getting past the drivers. So this really wasn't difficult for him. So it was an amazing contrast. Now, I'm sure there was a slightly different setup on the cars as well, and they're completely different racing drivers as well. They are. Bottas sometimes struggles to make his way through the field, and sometimes he's just on it, and he was absolutely on it at the Italian Grand Prix last weekend. So there you go. Next, let's get to the pit stops. This was set up for a one-stop race for the majority of the field, actually. So there wasn't going to be too much excitement around pit stops like we had in the Dutch Grand Prix. So it was pretty certain what the strategy was going to be here. And it was Ricciardo who pitted first. Verstappen then pitted next, but Verstappen had a horrific stop and it lasted 11 seconds. So he lost a lot of ground about this and he was pushed. Essentially, when things would work themselves out after the pit strategy, he would find himself a little bit down the field. Hamilton actually found himself then in the lead of the race for a while, and so he had a bit of clean air. However, Hamilton also had a slow stop. Now, it wasn't the 11 seconds that Verstappen's stop was, but when Hamilton came back out onto the circuit, he had Verstappen coming down the straight directly behind him, and this leads us on to the first corner collision that they had, and this was their second coming together of the race. Verstappen tried his best to get up alongside Hamilton into that first corner, and looking at it at that moment in time, I really thought it was a racing incident, because I couldn't necessarily apportion blame apart from saying, well, Verstappen could have gotten out of that if he really wanted to, by going over the chicane in a similar fashion to what Hamilton did earlier on in the race. Verstappen, though, is not that type of character. Verstappen is in it for the challenge. He stays strong in the challenge, and he follows through, which possibly isn't the best way to go in Formula One, because of course the cars are so fragile, especially at those types of speeds. But all the carbon fiber as well. It's not a strong material when it comes in contact with something at that speed. So there was a collision between the pair of them. And Verstappen got pushed a little bit up onto the curb. He went onto the green, and then as soon as he hit the sausage curb, the back of his car kind of jumped a little bit, so he lost traction. He had no control at that moment in time. His car came out a little bit, touched the back tire of Hamilton's car, and the resulting momentum propelled his car up on top of Hamilton's car, both of them going off the track into the gravel trap. Now, it looked like that was that for both of them, that they were out of the race. Hamilton was attempting actually to get back into the race. He was kind of stuck in the gravel with Verstappen's car on top of his, but he was attempting to reverse out of the gravel. He didn't realize that actually, as Verstappen jumped up over the top of his car, his back tire did take out Hamilton's rear wing, so it would have been no good. It would have been futile for Hamilton to make it back onto the track, but he didn't know this. Of course, he had to try. The other thing that we see these amazing close-up shots of it afterwards, and even the thumbnail for this video talking about the YouTube version of this podcast video, you can see that amazing image where the tire from Verstappen's car came down on Lewis Hamilton's head, and if it wasn't for the halo, I don't know what would have happened. Such a simple coming together as well. It's amazing to think that if we didn't have the halo, that there could have been very serious injuries from such a simple coming together. And if you look at it in that context, you really do have to apportion blame to one driver being a little bit too stubborn to get out of the challenge. Now, I'm not by no means a big Hamilton fan. I'm also not a big Verstappen fan. So I would like to think I'm somewhat neutral in this situation. And I'm not immediately jumping the bandwagon and saying that, this driver is to blame for that. But as I said, I found it very difficult to figure out who was in the blame at the time. The FIA, though, thankfully did figure out who they felt was to blame for this. But as I said, such a simple little incident by Verstappen not going across the chicane and instead sticking in with it, staying close to Hamilton. There could have been very serious accident or very serious injuries because of that, and thankfully that wasn't the case. The FIA did review that later on, and their feedback was, and this is the quoted text I have here in front of me, the stewards determined that Hamilton's position was reasonable and therefore find that the driver of car 33, which of course was Verstappen, was predominantly to blame for the incidents. So they judged that Verstappen wasn't up alongside Hamilton, and he was never ahead of Hamilton in the chicane or in that corner. So Hamilton had he had the right to take the line in the corner, is how they're looking at that. Now, Hamilton didn't take the corner quite as tight as he could have, the first part, the entry part, but I think, he knew exactly what Verstappen was up to, and he had to make sure that Verstappen didn't try anything. In the end, of course, Verstappen did try something. So Verstappen to blame, according to the FIA, and he gets a 3-place grid penalty. Now, whether or not that's the correct penalty, I don't know. If you're to apportion blame in something like that, is a 3-place grid penalty really enough? It's a tough one. It's the Russian Grand Prix next. It's typically a circuit that suits the Mercedes. In particular, Valtteri Bottas really likes the Russian Grand Prix. He's won there a couple of times. So, worst case scenario, Verstappen is starting in 3rd place after qualifying if both of the Mercs get ahead of him. That's what I would be thinking. That will push him down a further 3 positions, pushes him to 6th place. So yeah, it's probably rules him out of contention for that race if Hamilton and Bottas get a good start. And of course, if Bottas is ahead of Hamilton and Bottas has a good race, he'll be asked to hand it over to Hamilton. So I wouldn't worry about that too much from a Hamilton perspective. So maybe in a sense, this 3-place grid penalty actually works very well for Mercedes. I've heard a lot of people over the last week say that 3-place grid penalty, it's nothing, and Verstappen will get that back very easily, and it's even less than a 10-second penalty like Hamilton got in the British Grand Prix. Yeah, I'm not convinced. The Russian Grand Prix isn't exactly the most open circuit for overtaking either. So I'm not convinced. It'll come down to qualifying. If Verstappen is able to qualify in pole position, then it shouldn't hurt him as much, and he potentially has an opportunity to get back some of those positions on the start, especially if he starts in 3rd place, as opposed to starting in 6th place, where he'll be down the field in the battle. And as we've mentioned, it's not Verstappen's style to get out of a battle or to take the route of less danger, so he could very well find himself having a collision with somebody further down, maybe even Pierre Gasly. Can you imagine? Ooh. The politics that would go with that one. As a result of the collision between Verstappen and Hamilton, there was a safety car period. Once the race got back up and running, there was a fantastic battle between Norris and Charles Leclerc. Charles Leclerc was actually in 2nd place. Norris realised that his teammate, of course, was winning the race, and he saw an opportunity for himself to get the race win. And he made very quick work of getting by Charles Leclerc. He did look like a guy who was on a mission, and obviously Norris is the guy who had been doing everything really well for McLaren all season and sitting in 4th place in the championship, and he has been very much the impressive driver in the McLaren by comparison to Ricciardo. Ricciardo, of course, new this season to McLaren setup, so it takes a little bit of time to get used to that as well. And then he was faced with this situation, he being Norris, that his teammate Ricciardo could get their first win in several years for McLaren. So he was not having that. He got past Leclerc, as I said, and then, he put some pressure on Ricciardo. Then he was on the team radio asking for Ricciardo to speed up because he's got more speed than him. The usual you hear in these types of situations between teammates. And Norris was told very firmly, you're not overtaking your teammate. I don't think they use that exact terminology, but they use some kind of team speak for hold position, stay where you are, don't do anything stupid. Actually, at that moment in time, I did wonder if that was the correct call, because if Norris did have more pace and Bottas, I would say Bottas was the guy who looked like he had a lot of pace and could really make his way back through the field and be a challenge for the McLarens at the end of the race. But no, McLaren made their decision, and it turned out to be the right decision, and Ricciardo really did have a lot of pace towards the end of the race. And as it transpired in the end then, Ricciardo, as I said, did have a lot of pace. It was Bottas who finished in 3rd place, actually, behind both of the McLarens. But he finished just under 5 seconds behind Ricciardo. So that would put him about 3 seconds behind Norris. So he never really did come into the mix for the win, thankfully. For McLaren, that is. Not great for Bottas. He obviously had a great opportunity there, but he did start in last place. So to finish in 3rd place was an awesome result for Bottas. Let's not get ahead of ourselves here. That was an awesome result, and to be expected to win from last place would have been a very tall last. So it's a great race from McLaren, managed very, very well at the front by both of the drivers. Ricciardo was supreme. He really was supreme for the entire weekend. He was very good, very composed, very calm. Of course, he's been there before. He's won races before with Red Bull. He knows what it takes to win a race. And no issues with the cars. This was the part I was most worried about. Thinking back to the 90s and the early noughties, this was always what happened. You know, you were really worried when a driver got in the front of the race because there could have been some kind of issue with the car just before the end of the race. This didn't happen. Thank goodness. Let's not forget Damon Hill in the Arrows back in 97 in the Hungarian Grand Prix, I think it was, where he almost won the race before he had an issue with the car at the very end and just got overtaken. He did manage to come in second place, which was some consolation, but of course the records are all about the race wins, and so it doesn't stand out as much as it should, I suppose, and that's most likely it won't be that long until McLaren win a race again, in particular if they have a strong car for 2022. But you'd never know. You never know in Formula 1 when a race is a last race win for a team or a driver or anything like that. So I was absolutely thrilled to see Ricciardo win the race, and I was thrilled to see Norris in second place. And if it was the other way around, I would have been a little bit disappointed for Ricciardo, but I would have been absolutely thrilled for Norris as well. And Norris's first race win is, I feel like it's just around the corner as well. He's been knocking on the door for a while, so he has that ahead, hopefully very, very soon. And what was intriguing for me, and just before we finish off and look at the final classification, what was intriguing for me was the fact that Bottas had the fastest lap for the majority of the race, and then on the very final lap Ricciardo set the fastest lap. So he knows which side his bread is buttered on. Not only was he not content with winning the race, he said, let's go for the fastest lap as well. And the McLaren was able to deliver the fastest lap. You know, their tyres were just as worn as anybody else's. In fact, it was Ricciardo who pitted first ahead of some of the other cars, and he was able to pull off the fastest lap. So supreme. A really good performance from Daniel Ricciardo. Let's have a look then at the rest of the finishing order, or the rest of the field, and see who was where. So it was Ricciardo in first place, Norris in second place, we had Bottas in third place, Leclerc was in fourth place, a good result for him. Perez was in fifth place, not so good from Perez. Like, fifth place is okay, but you're really expecting him to be in the mix. Perez has been very much off the boil since he signed his new contract. He did not have a strong race weekend at any of the previous races, really. You know, he struggled somewhat at the Dutch Grand Prix. He, of course, had that crash on his way to the grid for the Belgian Grand Prix, and then only managing fifth place here at this race. And in fact, Perez started in 8th place, so he only made up 3 places within the race. And when you consider that Giovinazzi had an accident, Hamilton and Verstappen went out of the race, there's his 3 positions, so he just wasn't able to battle the other drivers. Also, Sainz finished behind him. Sainz was in 6th place. Sainz did somewhat struggle during that race as well. Stroll, good strong result for Stroll in 7th place. Good for him. Going as usual under the radar somewhat. Lance Stroll never has a very exciting race, but solid points in 7th place, and he gets in the points. His teammate did not get in the points. Alonso also doing something similar here, going under the radar somewhat, finishes in 8th place, and he gets some points for that as well. Russell was in 9th place, another points finish for Williams, and then we had Ocon in 10th place, so a double points finish for the Alpines. Absolutely nothing to be sniffed at there, you know, great result for them. Latifi, so unfortunate, was in 11th place. Vettel finished in 12th place. Giovinazzi finished in 13th, Kubica finished in 14th, and Schumacher finished in 15th. And then Mazepin, Hamilton, Verstappen, Gasly and Tsunoda were all out of the race. Tsunoda and Gasly going out quite early in the race with various car issues, and of course Hamilton and Verstappen took each other out. And Mazepin, I'm trying to remember what happened to Mazepin actually. I think he had car issues as well and had to go out of the race as a result. And I do see he was classified with 3 pit stops, so probably in and out due to whatever issues he was having. Maybe he had damage. I don't know why. I can't remember that. Sometimes what happens during these races as well, we don't really see all the action between Schumacher and Mazepin and Kubica and Giovinazzi at the back. Giovinazzi, of course, did start in 7th place, and I need to give him a shout out for another very strong qualifying performance, and of course a very strong performance during the sprint race. He did not finish well though at the very start of the race. He actually got up on one of the curbs and kind of spun the front of his car, hitting the barrier, taking off his front wing. He was able to keep the car going. He got back to the pits. He got his front wing replaced. There was no need for a safety car either to impact the rest of the drivers. But it was a challenging race from him from there on out. And that was it. So, as we said, the winner was Daniel Ricciardo. Yeah, thumbs up. Very, very happy about that. And the driver of the day, unsurprisingly, as well voted on the Formula 1 website or the Formula 1 social media, was Daniel Ricciardo. And can't argue with that. Was Bottas in contention for driver of the day? Yeah, sure, he probably was. But no, it was all Ricciardo. So that appears to be everything for now. Thank you very much once again for tuning in and listening or watching along this week for the show. We really appreciate your support. If you're on YouTube, hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, hit the bell as well if you want to be notified. If you're listening via a podcast, whichever platform you're on, subscribe to the channel or follow the channel or whatever the correct terminology is. As I said, we really appreciate your support and looking forward to being back soon. Speak to you then.